Are you ready?
For a podcast hosted by George T.
Who the hell are you?
I am the movie geek.
Who are you?
I am the movie geek.
You are such a geek.
Thank you.
And now, on with the show.
It's time!
It's showtime.
It's showtime. Here we go.
Welcome back to the Movie Geek Podcast. I'm your host, George T, as always, and welcome back to everyone. Last week, we finally got a video up on the YouTube side. It actually went pretty well, although I know there's some critiquing I have to do with this one, so hopefully this one will be a little bit brighter and sound quality will be a little bit better. Obviously for you on the Spotify and other audio apps, obviously hopefully we haven't had any volume issues, so we're still working in progress here. I know it has been it's been a lot of fun to do all this, and can't wait to keep going. So this episode will be all about the history of horror, where horror started and how the movies came about, what genres are out there, because the genres have become so crazy. There's just a multitude now of horror genres, and I will go through a list of my picks for movies that came out yearly, by decade, and then I will give you a list of movies that were voted the top in their decades, and then I will give you my take on one list or one movie that was voted number one horror scariest movie of all time. And I guarantee you, you may think the same way as I do. I think it is absolutely the scariest movie ever. So, with that being said, let us get into this. And, horror, captives a lot of people. There are a lot of people that don't like horror films, and understandable. There's a lot of fear, anxiety over, scary clowns, or slashers, or being stalked, or being trapped in a room, and it's just, or a haunted house, for example. Now, as a paranormal investigator, part-time obviously, and somebody who grew up watching horror, and it's kind of funny is that when I was a kid, and I'll get into this later, but when I saw Poltergeist for the first time, it absolutely scared me, and I used to sleep with my covers over my head. I was so scared of being, outside of my blankets and sheets that something was going to attack me. And it's so weird how now I can just go into a haunted house and try to talk to spirits and not be scared at all. And so it's kind of crazy, but there's just a lot of great things that came out of horror. There are some things that I don't like about horror films or horror genres, and I'll get into those when I get into the genres. But I want to just quickly mention that I have the results of the poll that Warner Brothers and Fandango did on their Instagram post. I do not agree with the fan votes, and I honestly am a little shocked, but I don't know what the demographic was or anything else. It's just an Instagram post. And I just feel like the the end result is more of not from my generation, but from this generation. And I'll go over all of that very soon. I just want to quickly give you the weekend box office from this past weekend. And the reason why I say that is because number one was the horror film Terrifier 3. This movie had a $500,000 budget. Okay, Art the Clown has become such a iconic horror figure. These movies, you may or may not like them. You may think they're the most disgusting films ever. I will have a little show about Terrifier series later after I see Terrifier 3. But again, this movie had a $500,000 budget. And in its first weekend, it made $18.9 million. I mean, crazy to think that this movie, which started out as a small picture that was at these small independent film things, and it got such a great reaction that the second one came out and it got big stars, and it just has spawned such a great response. Terrifier 3 also combined with Ice Nine Kills, and I'm going to mention Ice Nine Kills is because they are a local band who I mentioned in the last one, does a lot of movie songs. So they had cooperated with Terrifier 3 and did a promotional new video for that movie. I thought it was awesome. So, great for Ice Nine Kills. Side note, I would really like to get them on the show, or at least Spencer. So if anybody knows anything, let me know. Anyway, second place was Wild Robot at 14 million. Beetlejuice continues to roll along, 7.3 million. And number one last week was The Joker. So this fell 81% down from the week before, made 7 million. So again, I'm going to mention this every time a DC movie fails. It's DC. I know that it is not directly related to the DCEU or the DCU as they're being called, but it's not that good. I will say though, however, I did see the first episode of Penguin, and my son George and I will continue to watch it. And so far, through that first episode, it might be watchable. It has a little connection to the Gotham series that was on Fox that is not Batman related. Like, Gotham was a young Bruce Wayne trying to become Batman, and so this has pretty good showing. And then number 5 was Piece by Piece, which is the Lego movie about Pharrell Williams, his music career and whatnot. Okay, so let us get into what the meat of this podcast will be, this episode. The horror genres, horror movies in general. So, where did horror start? It is believed that it started through folklore and religion back in the ancient Roman days. So, again, if you do read a lot of these Gothic novels, you read anything with folklore, a lot of it has some horror in it. And again, this is where the genres, there are 5 main genres, and then subsequently out over the years that they have branched out and so on. So there's a lot of branches to this, but there are 5 fundamental ones. So later on when we get into movies, there is movies that you don't really identify as horror that actually are horror in some way, and I'll get into all that soon. But anyway, so the ancient Romans were some of the first that came up with this, and then obviously through the years the other cultures had their folklores and myths and legends and so on. So it just kept growing and growing. The first Gothic novel was written by Horace Walpole. It was called The Castle of Ontario. It was written in 1765, and it told obviously of a castle that was haunted. So over the years there were more and more of these stories that came out and so on. And then obviously in 1890 the first movie camera was made by Thomas Edison and William Dickerson. Subsequently there was, the book, and then there was pictures, and then there was motion pictures. Obviously silent films, because obviously sound was not a thing for cameras back then. So 1902, the first horror movie was produced. It was called A Trip to the Moon. That was a full-length feature film. Before that, there were two 3-minute small films made by a Frenchman named George Miles. It was in 1896, The Haunted Castle, and then The Bewitched Inn. Obviously, there was actually French titles. I only translated to English. So those 3-minute films made him famous. Then in 1902, he did his full-length feature film. Obviously, again, all silent films. So horror, in that regard, was more visual and psychological. And so you could see what was happening on the screen, and obviously your fear and horror would be seen in that film. So that was kind of an impressive little history that I researched and wanted to share with you guys with this episode. And so eventually into 1920, the first big film on the big screen came out, and it was voted the best of that era in the 1920s, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligula. So this film really got the ball rolling for the bigger audiences once the movie theaters started opening and so on, and obviously another silent film. Alright, so let us get into the genres of horror, the 5 major ones. So there is the gore and disturbing, clearly, psychological, monster, killer, and finally paranormal. All 5 major genres. The gore and disturbing. This breaks down as torture, splatter, cannibalism, and extreme. So these would be the ones with multiple dismemberments and, torture. Like if you watched Hostel, they're torturing their victims before they chop them up. And obviously cannibalism, that would be The Forest. So these type of movies have that just, oh my god, I'm caught in this genre of, oh my god, like this could, god, I can't imagine what I would do in this situation, being tied up and tortured and knowing that I'm going to die. So That's horrifying. That's absolutely horrifying. I would not want to go through that. So then, let's go to killer. Obviously, slasher films, crimes, backwoods, and home invasion. Like The Strangers, or Scream, the slasher films. Crime, obviously being robbed in the middle of the night. Backwoods, I mean, getting lost in the woods. And The Hills Have Eyes is a perfect example, where you had a bunch of deformed hillbillies in the middle of the woods. Being tracked down in the woods with no escape is terrifying. So, let's go to psychological. Phobia and isolation. I mean, anybody who's claustrophobic, the perfect example is the movie with Ryan Reynolds, where he's trapped in a coffin and has to try to survive long enough for his for his troops to come and get him. It's called Captive. It's a really good movie. Phantasm, madness and paranoia, and home invasion again. So, like, not so much panic room for the home invasion psychological, but more of maybe like misery. Maybe not much, but phobia and isolation obviously is the bigger one in this category. And then of course we got monsters. I mean, zombies, undead, or from viruses. Resident Evil is your perfect example. Night of the Living Dead, chemical related, they raise the dead. Vampires, werewolves, I mean, take your pick on this one. You've got, Dracula, and you've got Wolfman, and then you've got, obviously, them together in movies like Underworld. Classic mythology, or mythological creatures, that is a thing. Giant monsters, neo-monsters, animals and nature, small creatures, and of course aliens. So clearly aliens, everybody wants to try to meet one. The only good one is E.T. Obviously it's not a horror film, but again, when you think of aliens, Twilight Zone had a really good episode called To Serve Man, and this one was about these big 9-foot tall aliens that came down and try to broker peace with the humans, trying to help them grow the civilization. But in return, humans had to go to their home planet. But they left their book behind. So the scientists were trying to figure out what the book meant, or the title at least, and they realized at the very, very end, as their main scientist is getting onto the ship to go to their planet, find out that the book itself is called To Serve Man, a cookbook. And so they are bringing these people to their home planet to cannibalize them. So again, you've got a lot of things. And again, this all has a lot of integral parts. But the main theory is the 5 major ones. And then, of course, paranormal. Ghost, haunted house, possession, devil and demons, witches and occults, and supernatural. Of course. People are terrified of ghosts or haunted houses. I can understand. I've had some encounters um, with one ghost that really kind of did a lot to me, and it's kind of it's kind of unnerving. But for the most part, physical touching um, or just talking in general is or trying to communicate with them has been most of my thing, except for that one time up at the Shanley Hotel. So those are your 5 major categories and what subgenres are in there. Then eventually things came around where they did more subgenres, like comedy horror. Example, Zombieland, which is a great film, by the way. Zombieland 2, not so bad, but Zombieland was really good. Then you've got your sci-fi horror, which is obviously Aliens, and Cameron's vision for that movie was really good, taking from Ridley Scott's original Alien. Romance horror, Let the Right One In. Let the Right One In is terrifying in that somebody's love has been turned into a zombie, or in this case is a vampire. And so do you choose to still love them and want to be with them, or do you keep them out and let them just go? You know what I mean? So it is kind of a weird dynamic, but it works. Creepy kids. I mean, holy shit. Creepy kids. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how many movies you've seen with creepy kids, but they are kind of creepy. A lot of them are females, though. It's so bizarre. But obviously, the biggest one in that genre would be Omen. I mean, giving birth to the Antichrist is, geez, I don't even want to know. I'm glad my 2 boys are healthy and not the spawn of Satan. Gothic. A great movie in this regard, Crimson Peak. Yes, I know, Jessica Chastain was in it. She played the creepy sister to Tom Hiddleston, and in this film, it was really, really good. So if you haven't seen that, you should check that out. Revenge. I Spit on Your Grave. A woman that's left for dead in a grave, and she comes back to take out her attackers and the people that try to kill her. Pretty good movie. Found footage. This genre I am not a fan of. Paranormal Activity is your biggest one in this category. Look, found footage, I know, is kind of contradictory to what I do for paranormal and put it on YouTube or just in general. But this genre has gotten away from itself, and everything now that is found footage happens to really not have to be. Paranormal Activity, they had a bunch of movies in this under this name, and they got just weirder and weirder. And as found footage goes, take it or leave it. I know there's a lot of people who loved Blair Witch. I'm telling you right now, I was not a big fan of Blair Witch. And I give those guys a ton of credit for sparking a genre, subgenre of horror in that regard. It was a college project by 3 people with practically no budget, and this movie made a ton of money. But That being said, I was not a fan of it. And the reason why is because the characters were just, I don't know, unrelatable, or the fact that they were, you know, really whiny and stuff. And I'm not really big on that. Like, uh, you know, if you're going to do uh, horror, or you're going to do even watching some people, you know, do, um, you know, ghost hunts, um, you know, the extra screaming and, you know, being over the top, it bothers me because yes, I've had experiences, but I've never had one where I've absolutely lost my mind. Even the one in Shanley, where um, I was pretty scared, but I never got to a point where I was screaming my bloody head off and trying to run out the building. It's just so, you know, halfway through this movie, I was praying for them to die at some point. So I give them a ton of credit in the world, and they did an amazing job with it and sparked a whole new genre. Because then Cloverfield came out and it just spawned a whole bunch, and Cloverfield is just terrible. I'm sorry, I know they spun off a couple of more movies, even one in space. It's just, I don't know. I cannot gravitate toward found footage. I can't. Then obviously we get into anthologies. So VHS is a really good anthology, and you should definitely check that out if you do. They've got a bunch of them. And then finally, technology. So this is a brand new one because of the social media aspect. And the biggest one in this one is Unfriended. So this was a movie about these high school kids who regularly met, you know, on their computers, and this one friend in particular was having a hard time. Something gets spread around on social media, and he wound up killing himself, or did he? And so the cyber bullies in this one were his targets, and he snuffed them out one by one as he unfriended other people and so on. So it was obviously born around technology, but it was also psychological. Speaking back of psychological, if you've ever watched Japanese horror, I recommend it, because you've got movies like The Ring and The Grudge that came out obviously in America. They were Americanized. If you watch the Japanese version of these movies, they're psychological. Japanese horror is definitely psychological. Even one I will mention later on in uh, my review of some movies from different decades, and it is probably one of the more fascinating Japanese horror films of all times. It is super scary, and I will mention it later. So that is your history lesson on genres. So I failed to mention that this is going to be a two-parter. So I will finish this episode with the top movies from the Warner Brothers Fandango website poll. So remember, the category was It and Blade, Final Destination versus The Shining, Texas Chainsaw Massacre versus Poltergeist, The Exorcist versus Creepshow, Beetlejuice versus Trick or Treat, Last Days versus Lost Boys versus Wicker Man, Annabelle versus Conjuring, and Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th was the other one. So let me go through this really quickly. It advanced for me: Shining, Poltergeist, Exorcist, then Beetlejuice, Lost Boys, Conjuring, and Nightmare on Elm Street. So then, obviously, Shining and Exorcist moving on. Lost Boys over Beetlejuice, I know. Conjuring over Nightmare. And then the final four, Exorcist over The Shining, Conjuring over Lost Boys, and then the finals, Exorcist over The Conjuring. Exorcist was the winner for me. So, again, as I said at the beginning, the fans or the IG page went a little differently. They had it winning the whole thing. Now, I get it. The remakes with all the special effects and just, so scary with clowns. I get it. And I get the new generation seeing those films, not seeing maybe the original, or maybe they saw the original but loved these films. But how The Exorcist doesn't win this, or maybe even Poltergeist or Shining doesn't win this. Again, I think this might be more for maybe generationally, but it was an interesting poll anyway. So, with that being said, the next episode will have the top movies of the generations, and then my list of movies that should be seen by kids and over the years of the decades. And again, feel free to comment on anything that you hear on this episode or the next episode for sure, because I know I'm going to skip over a bunch of films, but again, that's because I like certain films and you like certain films. So, again, it's not, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't like these films or that you should like films. It's just, I'm giving my opinions and, and recommendations, and that's what we do here. That's what we do here. So, that being said, thank you all for listening to this first part, and don't forget the next part will be the top 10s or top 5s, which ones I decide to do. Alright, thank you for listening, and I will see you guys all at the movies.
You like that, baby? Let him know where I came from, yeah!
See you next time. Bye.
Waiting for you. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Hasta la vista, baby.
That's all, folks.